But this is the first time also in Queensland we've had an execution-style killing of police. And also, to take it even further, the neighbour went to investigate when this murderous trio lit a fire because they were trying to lure a policewoman out so they could shoot her dead. And she didn't know whether she was going to be shot or burnt alive. But this neighbour went out and he was shot in the back. He did not even know what was happening and he was ruthlessly murdered, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
The smoke is still clearing at the scene of a cold-blooded ambush where 3 people innocently lost their lives.
It is an unimaginable tragedy. This has been incredibly distressing and tragic for everyone.
Responding to a missing persons report, the officers were gunned down on arrival. 29-year-old Constable Rachel McCrow and 26-year-old Constable Matthew Arnold shot dead in an execution-style killing. The flames caught the attention of neighbours. Alan Dare went to investigate. He too was gunned down. Tactical response officers and Polair were called in as the siege continued for hours. Before the 3 offenders were shot dead by police. They were former school principal Nathaniel Train and his brother Gareth and Stacey Train.
Despite police efforts, the matter was unable to be resolved peacefully.
During the siege, 16 officers moved in to retrieve the bodies under heavy gunfire, not knowing if they were dead or alive, but desperate to see if anything could be done to save them. The scene has been described as a war zone. The coroner is investigating, along with Ethical Standards Command.
In 2017, Nathaniel Train was described as a mild-mannered principal of a state school north of Cairns.
The principal's position is held in such high regard, and whilst he wasn't in the community a terribly long time, it's a position of esteem.
He later moved south and headed up Walgett Primary School, but left last year, raising concerns about education policy. The 46-year-old dropped off the radar, and last week New South Wales Police issued an appeal to help find him. That led Queensland Police to their fateful trip to Weambilla, west of Brisbane.
That request was given to the local police to go to this address to check on that missing person.
Property records show the house on Waynes Road is owned by Nathaniel Train's brother, Gareth Train and Stacey Train. The trio eventually killed by police after a 6-hour siege. School records show Stacey Train has been a teacher at nearby Tara Shire State College in 2019. Locals here are reeling as police officers at the scene try to work out not only what happened, but how a family of teachers came to brandish weapons and shoot dead police officers and a neighbour.
One of the offenders, Gareth Train, was heavily involved in the online conspiracy community. Is that an avenue that you'll be investigating?
Yes, definitely, definitely. As I said, we will not leave a stone unturned. Every aspect of their lives will be investigated, interrogated. Everyone who had contact with them over a period of time. It will be a very thorough, and it is going to be a very complex investigation.
Good evening. As hearts break for 2 young police officers and an innocent neighbour murdered in cold blood in an ambush and shootout in Queensland, disturbing details are emerging about the armed trio who killed them. One was a conspiracy theorist whose twisted ideas led to 6 deaths and left a nation united in grief.
A guard of honour for 2 young constables. It was an ambush, unexpected, swift, brutal, and today an attack on them feels like an attack on society.
It is an extremely emotional and challenging time for the Queensland Police Service.
Constable McCrow graduated only last year, Matthew Arnold the year before. Constables Keely Brough and Randall Kirk, rookies, and the 4 of them headed down this driveway in Wyambilla yesterday afternoon at the request of New South Wales Police. They were looking for Nathaniel Train. Their missing person was inside with brother Gareth and his partner Stacey, dressed in fatigues, all armed with rifles and shotguns and willing to use them.
They made the ultimate sacrifice.
As they had approached the front door, Constables Arnold and McCrow were ambushed and shot by the 3 occupants at close range. Rachel McCrow lay wounded. She begged for her life and they killed her anyway. Constable Randall Kirk was shot in the leg running for cover. Constable Keely Brough hid in long grass, while neighbour Alan Dare was also killed, shot in the back as he rushed to see what was happening. 16 uniformed officers swarmed the property. A wild shootout ensued, as did extraordinary courage under fire as they retrieved their colleagues' bodies and rescued Alan Dare's wife. She was hiding in the back of a car. Heavily armed tactical police besieged the property, and at 10:30 p.m, Nathaniel Train, Gareth Train and his partner Stacey lay dead. So why? There are no firearms registered to this address, no police intelligence suggesting anything like this could happen, and a look at the killer's background is at the same time dark but also baffling. Nathaniel Train was a school principal. He taught at Walgett in northern New South Wales and Cairns. Stacey was a guidance counsellor in a relationship with both Nathaniel and Gareth, police believe. Their father was a Christian pastor for almost 3 decades.
I've lost 2 children. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the police or to anyone else that was involved?
I don't need to talk to you. I've already had a conversation with the police this morning, so I don't need to talk to you.
But Gareth Train has spouted unhinged conspiracy theories for years. We are all pawns, all expendable in the Illuminati game. He describes the Port Arthur massacre as a government psychological operation to disarm the Australian population. Martin Bryant was the perfect patsy. They declared themselves sovereign citizens, not answerable to Australian law, and when the law came to them, just to help a missing man.
And let's go live now to Robert Ovadia at the scene. Rob, what more can you tell us about Nathaniel Train?
Hi Mark, well it's really hard to believe a man who used to be a school principal was capable of such barbarity. Today we spoke with a senior New South Wales politician who had had dealings with him. He said he left the education system embittered by the process. He fell off the grid, lived in Dubbo for a short time. He was last seen there in December last year, maintained contact with family, but it was 6 weeks ago that he fell off the grid again. There were concerns for his welfare, which is why a missing persons report was filed, and those 4 officers arrived here yesterday afternoon. Every single one of them, Mark, was wearing body cam. The images, I'm told, are very disturbing.
A lot of people have been asking very good questions about the circumstances surrounding this Queensland shooting. So I'm not going to venture into that territory, but what I am trying to focus on here is the way that we can see the media, the police, the state spinning, weaving a narrative out of these tragic events. And you can see it happening in real time here, how they're trying to humanize or rehumanize the police after the damage that's been done to the public trust, the war crimes committed over the last 3 years by police, the assaults, the financial burdens placed on people, concocted fines. So, yes, now this is all a terrible tragedy. And they're using these buzzwords again: conspiracy theorist, extremist. They're not using directly the word terrorism, but the picture appears to me that it's this domestic terrorist notion, even though they're not using the word terrorism, which I think has got probably something to do with this New South Wales Supreme Court case that I've been covering, State of New South Wales versus Kiskinen. Whereby we have it on court record that the United Kingdom of Australia is not a terrorist organisation. despite that, Koskinen was kept in custody and forced medical procedures on, all of the behest of the New South Wales Fixated Persons Unit. So it's interesting that the Queensland Police were responding to a call from New South Wales Police in this instance. So I thought we might go back to 2015 and have a look at this ABC News article and have a look at this oxymoronic term, sovereign citizen, and see the propaganda, the narrative that they've been trying to spin, and raises a few questions. So, sovereign citizens, terrorism assessment warns of rising threat from anti-government extremists. So we get this moronic term, sovereign citizen, supreme subject, and extremist. Anti-government extremists known as sovereign citizens have been identified as a potential terrorism threat in Australia by a confidential New South Wales police report. We've got New South Wales again. A confidential police report that is not confidential now. New South Wales Counter-Terrorism and Special Tactics Command Assessment obtained by 7:30 suggests there are as many as 300 sovereign citizens in the state, and that their numbers are growing. It also suggests they have the motivation and capability to act against government interests and should be considered a potential terrorist threat. So that's a really interesting sentence, I think. It also suggests they have the motivation and capability to act against government interests and should be considered a potential terrorist threat. So if you act against government interests, you're a potential terrorist threat. Interesting in light of what happened to Ewa Koskinen and Stephen Spires. Police records show the number of Australian sovereign citizens in New South Wales doubled from 2009 to 2011 and nearly tripled from 2009 to 2012. Interactions with police increased 50% in 2011, with a noticeable increase in threats of violence. In the United States, the Federal Bureau of Investigation classifies sovereign citizen extremists as domestic terrorists. Not that we should be taking any cues from the FBI. The US Department of Homeland Security has listed them as the #1 domestic terror threat in America. Detective Superintendent John O'Reilly is the commander of the Counter-Terrorism and Special Tactics Operation Group for New South Wales Police. He said New South Wales Police have been examining overseas trends and threats. Sovereign citizens are people that don't buy into our legal framework, our system of government, he said. They consider themselves individuals and operate outside the law and outside our tax system. So I think in government interests, is that the threat? What are sovereign citizens? Sovereign citizens don't accept Australia's legal framework or government. They consider themselves outside the law. Counter-Terror Command warns they should be considered a potential terrorist threat. I can see potential terrorist threat. And I don't know, I've not heard anyone call themselves a sovereign citizen. Maybe there are people that would use that term, but extremist sovereign citizen. Sovereign citizen extremists. These words, what does that mean? An extremely supreme subject. An extremely oxymoronic individual. We are always conscious of preventing terrorism, and we are mindful of any movements that have the potential to go down that path. Yes, you are mindful because you've fixated. Police intelligence of incidents involving sovereign citizens in Australia ranges from displaying homemade registration plates and plans to use paint bombs to disrupt court proceedings, to making plans to kidnap a judge, judicial officials and a police officer. The report also states that in 2012, sovereign citizens threatened to burn down the home of a judge and cause harm with firearms, and had plans to murder sheriff officers if they attempt to seize property. While Commander O'Reilly stressed Australia had not experienced any of the high-impact violence resulting in death or casualties associated with the movement overseas, he said there were indications of radicalisation. Here's another buzzword. This propaganda is radicalisation. Labeling people extremists, sovereign citizen, radicalisation, conspiracy theorist, people that are a threat to the government are terrorists. This is what they wanted. This is the narrative they want to have. Anyone who is a threat to the government can be labelled a domestic terrorist. It didn't work out too well for DSC Matthew Reason. A number of instances have ended up in people being placed under arrest, and sometimes there's been a degree of resistance on the basis that they claim that the police officer has no authority over them, he said. We are always conscious of preventing terrorism, and we are mindful of any movements that have the potential to go down that path. Yes, so you fixate. And then there's this section about John Wilson. Australian sovereign citizen faced court more than 200 times. John Wilson's been identified by senior police sources as an extremist member of the sovereign citizen movement in Australia. The 73-year-old retired dentist has been fighting the system for 20 years. He looks like a dangerous individual. His path towards sovereign ideology started in the late 1990s when he was evicted from his home because he refused to acknowledge the mortgage over his house. It means you are your own master. In other words, you have the right to your own body, your own freedoms. And if anybody wants to impose something upon you, they have to do it lawfully. As if that statement is extreme. You have the right to your own body, your own freedoms. If you are a sovereign person, you make the laws for yourself. You decide in your own conscience what you want to do. It's a bit more interesting. Mr. Wilson only pays fines or taxes when he thinks they are fair. He's been to court more than 200 times and jailed. In 1997, he threw a plastic bag containing yellow liquid at a Supreme Court judge. In 2006, he attempted a citizen's arrest of a Supreme Court judge. And in 2009, Mr. Wilson sent a letter to the police commissioner. In it, he threatened to burn down the premises he was evicted from. Well, that's clearly stupid. He said that he was the victim of a government conspiracy and that there were hundreds of other Australians who shared his beliefs. There would be many hundreds scattered across the continent. The Queenslanders are very conscientious. The Victorians are doing a good job. And even now in Western Australia, we are getting more and more farmers and ordinary people saying, no, this is not right, Mr. Wilson said. At the moment, I have membership of about 95 people, but I haven't really pushed it. The most notable thing about this, I think, is that this is such a danger, and there are over 300 of these sovereign citizens, whatever that is, in New South Wales. And this is the example they decided to use, a 73-year-old retired dentist. Yeah, if he's the most dangerous. Okay, so here we go. Deadly US attacks linked to movement. The sovereign citizen movement began in 1969 in the United States as an anti-tax, anti-government group called Posse Comitatus. Members believed that the United States federal authority was unlawful and only accepted small levels of government. Up to 300,000 Americans identify as sovereign citizens. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, of those 100,000 are considered extreme. I'm wondering what the definition of extreme is. What distinguishes an ordinary sovereign citizen from an extreme sovereign citizen? Before the 2001 World Trade Center terrorist attacks in New York, the most destructive loss of life during peacetime in the United States was the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. 168 people died, including 19 children under the age of 6. The two key conspirators were domestic terrorists, and Timothy McVeigh's partner in the attack was Terry Nichols, a person designated by the FBI as a sovereign citizen. Since the Oklahoma bombing, 32 law enforcement officers have been murdered by domestic, anti-government extremists in America. 2 of the officers killed were serving under former chief of the West Memphis Police, Bob Podor, in May 2010. One of them was his son, Brandon Podor. It has been 5.5 years since he's been killed, and it was the most devastating event that has occurred in my life, Bob Podor told 7:30. Sergeant Brandon Podor and his partner, Officer Bill Evans, were shot and killed during a traffic stop by sovereign citizen Jerry Kane Jr. and his 16-year-old son, Joseph Kane. Brandon and Bill were killed because they had never heard of sovereign citizens. It was something new to them. If they didn't know about them, Mr. Podor said. I'm convinced of this. If they knew and they had the training that we are now giving officers around the country and around the world, they would be alive today. They would be with us. Okay, so here we have an admission of the ineptitude of the FBI, the United States law enforcement here, where 2010, but we're told in 1995 that Terry Nichols was designated by the FBI as a sovereign citizen. So they were, and yes, 168 people died in the Oklahoma City bombing. So that wasn't enough to focus you on this sovereign citizen, extremist sovereign citizen danger. So 15 years later, and a sovereign citizen kills 2 police officers. Well, it just all reeks of revisionary tactics, a reconstruction to suit this turning of the policy enforcers upon the people. I don't know how else to see it. Since their deaths, Bob Potter has worked closely with the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama and the FBI to train law enforcement officials in the United States and Canada about the dangers sovereign citizens potentially pose. No one had heard of sovereign citizens in May 2010. Now the FBI says that they are the number one threat in this country. Australia is facing a similar scenario that we went through, and it's starting the same way, he warned. They didn't commit acts of terrorism over here at one time, now they do. And you can't wait until you lose officers or officers are killed to decide to do anything. Yes, you need to be fixated. You need to intervene before a crime is committed. So, yeah, it's obvious to me that they're trying to, with this Queensland shooting, they're trying to tar with this brush anyone who questions the government. A conspiracy theorist is just essentially someone that doesn't believe the government narrative. And we see this, these very well produced clips come out about the Queensland shooting. A day later, they seem to have a lot of the events all timed out, and it's all very well produced. And yeah, they get to use their most of their buzzwords. But what I think is pertinent is the New South Wales Supreme Court Justice Julia Lonergan's findings in the case New South Wales versus Kiskinen. She says at the end in paragraph 126, I also doubt that the type of activities the defendant might engage in, even if he was still a believer, would, properly considered, amount to a serious terrorism offence. So the United Kingdom of Australia is not a terrorist group, but New South Wales police, the state of New South Wales, detained Ewa Kiskinen for 12 months, and Rule 92 violated him with forced medical procedures based on psychiatric quackery. And then in the case, we find out that there was no offence. So yeah, it's a nice try. It's a nice try here to get people to sympathise with policy enforcers and to dehumanise the people that were shot dead and that allegedly shot police officers. But yeah, we all remember the war crimes, and if you're following this, please consider donating to stephenspires.com if you want to see a case brought to the High Court of Australia. Then we need a fundraise. And the way I see it, Stephen's the only person who can speak for us. So do donate. The link will be below the video if you have the capacity and you want to see the real terrorists actually held to account.